I'm very honored today to introduce Amy Bernstein. Is it Bernstein or Bernstein?
Bernstein.
Bernstein, thank you. Congratulations for having your article published in Authority magazine titled Five Tips for a Great Relationship with Your Adult Child. Amy Bernstein is the author of Wrangling the Doubt Monster. I love that title. Semicolon, Fighting Fears, Finding Inspiration. Just love that title. I'm working on a lot of limiting beliefs myself. She is an award winning novelist, a certified nonfiction book coach. She teaches writing and creativity workshops. She publishes Doubt Monster, another great title, every week on Substack. How did your career in writing begin?
Well, Nancy, first, thanks so much for chatting with me. I figured that writing is the only thing I was ever able to do reasonably well. I mean, I'm terrible at math, and science fascinates me, but also terrified me. I ran screaming from an astronomy class when I realized that you had to know physics. I couldn't just look at the star. I could just gaze at the stars and appreciate them. That wasn't what it was about. But seriously, I think it's one of those things that it's just kind of my innate skill set. So I always gravitated toward writing and loved it the most. And I was that rare college student who actually didn't procrastinate on writing papers. I loved writing papers, and I kind of dove right in.
I have written 8 books. I'm working on my ninth, and writing is just a breeze compared to a lot of other things I need to do
Yes,
for being in
yes.
business. How do our goals for parenting a young child need to change for an adult child?
Yes, I think that we sometimes forget that we have created these wonderful autonomous individuals who are going to have a life of their own. They're going to need to make their own mistakes. They're going to grow and learn in their own ways and at their own rate. And they're going to grow away from us eventually. And in my view, it's our job as parents to help them to do that, to help them to grow away from us. I don't mean become emotionally distant, of course, but to be able to really be independent and go out there in the world and figure things out for themselves. So I think that early on, we need to find ways to let our children experiment with the world, to take a tumble here and there, and find out how to make friends and have all kinds of experiences. And we want to support them in their own journey to grow.
I call that the definition of a good parent, that gradually lets go
Hmm.
in a gradual way, appropriate, age appropriate way, but loosening control. So why is it so hard to let our kids learn from their own mistakes?
I think there's a couple things going on here. We love them so much that we hurt when they hurt. And we are so afraid to see them get hurt that we
Yes.
kind of want to stop that before it happens. But really, the only way we make our way in this world is frankly, we have to take the good with the bad, and we have to be hurt in order to grow and mature and learn from our mistakes, from other people's mistakes. And we just can't protect them from everything. And that's hard. That's so hard. But it's at the end of the day, it's also true.
It's also very respectful, isn't it? I
I
think
hope so.
I think pain is one of the primary ways we learn lessons in life. And to, jump in and interrupt the consequences of bad decisions is really a disservice to our children.
Yeah,
You
I agree.
decided you decided to be very selective in giving your adult daughter unsolicited advice. Describe your criteria for giving advice and how do you do that when it hasn't been asked for?
Carefully. Yes, for me, part of treating my daughter as an adult was showing her the respect by not telling her what to do and not always telling her what I thought she should do or what I thought was the best course or things of that nature, which, I don't like that in an adult relationship. One of my peeves is when an adult's saying, what you really ought to do. And I feel I feel condescended to, even if someone is very well-meaning. And
Yeah.
so if I'm going to have a respectful relationship with my adult daughter, I'm going to hold back from sometimes giving her that advice, even if I know that the advice I have to offer, it might be beneficial, it might be the right thing for her to hear. But the thing is, when we do offer that advice unsolicited, they don't necessarily process it or take it in, and they may well go off and do 180 degrees the other way because we were trying to tell them what they should do. So when I do offer that advice, I try to do it in the form of a conversation where maybe I'm asking questions along the lines of, huh, so you chose to do X. I'm just kind of wondering, how did you arrive at that decision and how's that going for you? And that sounds very clinical, and I probably wouldn't say it quite in those words to my daughter. But the point is, I'm soliciting feedback from her on how her decision-making process is going, because maybe she is open to hearing a different way or making a change or something of that nature, but I'm not just going to come out and tell her.
I recently was the organizer of a TEDx event in my community, and one of the speakers talked about the power of non judgmental curiosity, asking questions without judgment. That makes it easier for the receiver of our question to respond with information rather than clamming up and running away because we're trying to give them advice. And I think that's the kind of questions you're talking about.
Absolutely, and what a great term that is. I think that that's the great basis for any adult relationship, whether it's with your own kid or just somebody else or a peer. Um, and frankly, even in the workplace as well, and even when there's a power differential, I think it's a great basis for a respectful relationship. Look, we're all judgmental creatures, but we don't have to always articulate our opinions from a place of judgment. We can
Mhm.
certainly find other ways to couch those things and to do it in a conversational or a questioning tone that's respectful to the other person and their own thought process.
I've spent 30 years teaching communication, respectful communication methods. And one of the most disrespectful methods is giving unwanted advice because it sets you up on a plane higher than the person you're speaking to. It's condescending, as you mentioned. It's so disrespectful. So keep your advice to yourself unless it's asked for. You,
I
men-
agree.
you mentioned three choices you have when your adult child is about to make a decision that concerns you. The first one was to respect their right to make their own decision. Has
Mhm.
that at times been very hard for you?
Uh, yes, it certainly has. And I think that what I fell back upon, what I reminded myself was that my daughter's judgment in the world thus far had been excellent. She had made good choices for herself. She had made decisions that ultimately helped her, worked to her benefit, put her in a good position, made her happy. And so if I see her taking one that is concerning for whatever reason, I remind myself that she's got a pretty good track record and that she's not going to suddenly go crazy. That's just not her style. So,
Mhm.
I think you just hold on to it. You watch and you try and maybe ease the path a little bit if you can. But again, we have to let them um go off the trail if that's what's going to happen, because that's living. And we
Yes,
want our kids to live their own life.
yes. During the years when my granddaughter was a teenager, my son would frequently call me and spend 15 minutes complaining about her because she was a very willful child, butted heads with him quite a bit. And I'd let him talk and I'd be sympathetic, but then I'd say, is she using drugs? No. Do you like her friends? Yeah, I like her friends. Has she made any really stupid decisions lately? No. Then just relax. She's going to be okay.
Absolutely. And it's I would just guess, and of course I don't know. He was just asserting his own will and wanting her to do things his way. But first of all, she's a teenager, so she's going to think like a teenager. Second of all, you have gender difference there, and that makes a huge difference. And third of all, there's just that parental thing of wanting to basically make it all okay for them. But yeah, I hope he learned to like pull back a little because they'll have a much better relationship if he can do that.
He did, and their relationship now is couldn't be better.
That's great. That's great to hear.
She confides in him in ways that I would never have dreamed in, confiding in my dad. I didn't have that safety or emotional connection with my parents that Peter and his wife have cultivated in their two children. So she's really a good human being, and she'll probably make mistakes she regrets, but so do all of us.
So do all of us. Right. Right.
You mentioned a second tactic with your child is going down a path that you just can't endorse, is to put a little more space between you. Can you describe what that meant?
I think that when our children become adults, and for me, that separation even starts if they choose to go to college. I think that separation begins formally then. Let the child set the boundaries about contact and communication and what they want and need from you as the parent. We hear so much about the so-called helicopter parent and that kind of thing. And again, we're in an uncertain and sometimes unsafe world, and so we just want to take care of them and protect them. But I think when our children separate from us physically, they leave the house, it's important to let them define the way we interact from that point forward. And even though you may want to talk to your child every day, you may worry about them every day, you may feel it might make you feel safer if you know where they are at 6 p.m. or 9 p.m. or 2 a.m. There's that point where it really comes down to trust, doesn't it? There's a point at which we have to trust them to keep themselves safe and making healthy and good decisions. And we have to sit back and let that trust do its work, and let them come to us when they're ready in the way that they're ready.
It's interesting, my relationship with my older son went through a period of time where we both needed some distance between us. And I realized that my worrying about him did not do him one bit of good.
Hmm.
It didn't help me, it didn't help him. And the best I could do was just trust that he would find his way through. And eventually he did, with some pretty painful lessons, but it was a chance for me to grow out of that controlling, advice giving stage of and worrying part of
Right.
parenting that didn't help either one of us.
I think too that, I'm sorry, can I add one thing?
Please do.
I th- I think too that we need to remember that all our children grow up and mature at very different rates. And what we expect from a 19-year-old is from one 19-year-old is not the way another 19-year-old is going to behave, or 22 or 25. And there's research that shows that boys do mature emotionally and even intellectually more slowly than girls do, generally speaking. And so we want them to be thinking like adults before they're able to think like adults. They're going to be more impulsive. They're going to um, do things without necessarily thinking about consequences. Um, that's part of where they are in their actual lives. That's who they are as human beings at that moment. And unless we know they're putting themselves in true peril, we really have to try to let that unspool, even though it's difficult to watch.
Well, the third thing that you mentioned, when there's a huge gap between a parent and child, is to seek a mutually trusted mediator. Is that something that you ever needed to do?
Um, when our daughter was very young, she did see a therapist around some issues related to perfectionism and maybe some anxiety. And I don't want to say more about it than that. She's
Sure.
absolutely fine. But
Sure.
as an adult, I don't think that we've never certainly seen the need for any kind of my husband and I for any kind of mediating
Mhm.
presence. I think that that can play both ways in a parent-child relationship. On the one hand, it can potentially ease a path toward better relations between the parent and child if the mediator has the best interests of both at heart and can speak the language of the parent and the child. It can also go the other way, and turn parent-child against one another depending on the dynamic. So I think that's a tricky one.
I once had a coaching session with an entire family, husband, wife.
Mhm.
I think there were 3 children and a spouse that were at an impasse. And we spent a couple hours, just helping them hear each other, take turns hearing each other. And by the time they left, they were all in a good place. And I had so much respect for the parents who requested this session and also for the adult children for being willing to come
Yeah,
to a mediating session. I
yeah,
just so much admiration for them for doing that.
yeah.
I'm wondering, what did you learn from your relationship with your parents?
I learned that I wanted to parent somewhat differently.
Oh,
I had very loving parents. My mother's deceased, but my father's very old but still living. Very loving parents. Cared for us all a great deal. I'm the oldest of 5 children, but I think this was also in line with their generation. They were kids growing up in the Depression and kind of had a foot in the old world in their own families. And I don't think that they ever thought that it was their role or their job or necessarily their desire to befriend their children. They did want to parent their children, and they kind of always hewed to that role, the parent role.
parent
And
role.
it's fine. They did not do anything wrong. But
Yes.
I just knew that I was going to see my own child as a person, and that I thought one of the ways that I could show her my love was to, respect her from a young age. And I remember friends telling me, and I didn't recall this, they were always impressed with the way I talked to my daughter. They said, "You just talk to her like a person." I said, "I do? Like how else do we talk to our kids?"
Yeah.
That was interesting.
It's too bad we all parents don't do that.
Yeah, well,
You suggest to be open to learning from your child. What has your daughter taught you?
well, first of all, I think that the my daughter's generation, she's a millennial. I think millennials, and even the generation after them, the Generation Z kids who are even younger, I think they have a great deal to tell those of us who are Gen X or Boomer parents, a great deal to teach us. They see the world in different ways. They communicate in different ways. They have tremendous amount of compassion and tolerance on the whole, and accept people kind of much more for who they are. They don't label people quite the same way. I mean, yes, there are labels, but the labels are meant to be inclusive, not exclusive.
Yes.
And I think they also are looking for a different work-life balance than a lot of their parents have had, and they are looking for joy in the pursuits that they have out of the workplace. And work may not be the most important thing to them. Not that they don't take it seriously. So I think there's a great deal that we can learn from those younger generations, our kids' generations, about how to make their way in the world. And I love watching that, and I love thinking about things I can possibly, adopt in my own life.
I think the younger generation has far more emphasis on maintaining balance in their life.
Yes.
My parents grew up in the Depression and working, putting food on the table was the highest priority. They didn't worry about balance.
Right.
You
Yes.
also suggest, such a great suggestion, Amy, to have an open conversation about your own financial future. Tell us a little more about what you mean.
I see in my biological family, particularly, with my father, who has a typical view for his generation about money, which is it's not something you talk about with your kids. You show them where the safe deposit box is, and I think perhaps he's taken one of my siblings into a bit more confidence than that. He said some things to some of us, not to others of us. But there is no way a really open conversation about you know this is this is what my finances are like. This is what's going to happen when I die. We do know some of that, but I think that's mainly because we perhaps insisted on getting a little window into what was going to be going on. And particularly when you have an aging parent, I mean, my father is 94, who needs increasing levels of care. This has to get all sorted out. And I think, although my husband and I haven't had the conversation with our daughter and son-in-law yet, we absolutely will be much more forthcoming. I'm going to insist upon it about our financial future. Um, letting them know that we're going to be okay, that we have things in place to take care of us, that we will not need to move in with them, that they will not need to, feed us, all these things. I think it's good for them to know. And honestly, something that didn't make it into the piece, and I'll just bring up in passing, is I wish that more of us would also have open conversations around how we choose to die, if we have a choice, and
Mhm.
how we want that to be handled.
Mhm.
And that's something I'm working on planning that. I hope that I'm many, 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 many years away from that being a reality. But
Uh-huh.
I'm working on being open about that and finding ways to be open about that. Other than, it's not just about having a written will that they read, or a living will. It's more than that, and it's another conversation we don't do well in America in our families.
I grew up in a family like yours where finances were off limits. We were uh, almost punished if we asked any financial questions. And I was fortunate, my first husband's family, his parents were very open about their finances. And I just really admired that. So several years ago, I put together a notebook for my son that has copies of my will. And I took photographs of any antiques or family heirlooms that I thought he might like to know the history of, put the photographs in the notebook along with a written description of the history. And I just said, anytime you have questions, I want you to ask. I
Right.
don't want any, nothing needs to be hidden.
Mm-hmm.
It was a relief to me
Mm-hmm.
as well as to him. Why don't you tell us what you like the most about your daughter?
Oh my goodness. My daughter is a social worker, and she's 32. And I would say by the time she was even in her early 20s, she had more sense of herself, more presence, more self-confidence, more awareness and comfortableness with her place in the world than I had until I was into my 50s or maybe even my 60s. And I am in awe of her ability to make her way in the world, get very clear about what she wants and what she needs, and to go after it. And I think that's just incredible. And that will really stand her in good stead the rest of her life.
Well,
And she's a deeply loving person, a compassionate person, which is also wonderful.
that's not only a tribute to her, but it's probably the results of your attitude of wanting her to be comfortable making decisions and suffering whatever consequences may come from them so that she gained confidence in herself. Good for you. So, I want to thank you for joining me here today and sharing so much wisdom. You viewers can find Amy at her website called amywrites.live or live. I'm not sure how it's pronounced.
Dot live, yes, dot live.
amywrites.live. And you can read her article on Authority magazine called Five Tips for a Great Relationship with Your Adult Child. Amy, thank you so much for the time you shared with me today.
Thank you, Nancy. I enjoyed the conversation.
I did too.